Tour guides of Reddit. What's the worst thing a tourist has ever done under your supervision? Led a scuba diving tour. While signing the safety waivers and all that, one very old man kept telling us that he had a DNR. Do not resuscitate. We plainly told him that we are not bound to a DNR, and if he passed out for any reason we would attempt to resuscitate by our safety training. Pretty much all the divers are assuming this guy is gonna kill himself down there. Probs spit out the reg and go quietly into the night. A dive happens. Pretty much everyone is hawk-eyed on this guy. I see him go behind a large coral head and lay down in the sand and spit out his reg. He is only at about 60 featuring, so I grab him and wrestle him to the surface. He will not take my backup regulator, so I slam it against his mouth to purge air into his face. We get to the surface and he is fighting me non-stop, trying to pull all of his gear off. I throw a very hard punch to his jaw and knock him out. Actually trained to do this during dive rescues to keep the panicked person from killing you too. 3 weeks later and he tries to sue my dive shop and myself personally. TLDR. Guy tried to kill himself. WTF. Drown yourself on your own time. About 15 years ago, I worked as a deckhand on a line of boats that took people out to Fort Sumter. The trip was about an hour each way. One day, we were about halfway there and two teenagers decided it would be fun to jump off and try to swim to shore. This is in Charleston Harbor, which has a pretty solid tidal current, lots of boat traffic, and probably more sharks than one would like to think about. We ended up having to perform a water rescue on them, then continued on to the fort, with the Coast Guard coming and picking them up. All in all, an extreme act of stupidity. Was a kayak guide in Charleston last summer. Can confirm, much more sharks than one would like to think about. I used to do vineyard and garden tours for a pretty well-known winery. I had a lady ask to see any mallow vines we had, so I walked her over and she proceeded to dump ash all over them and yell, "We love you, Nana." Rest in peace. Needless to say, you are not allowed to dump human remains on food goods. I should mention the ashes came out of a gallon Ziploc baggie. It was a Christmas themed one, so maybe that makes it more tasteful. I'm a bush pilot in Alaska and occasionally do glacier air tours of my boss asks. I'm not a fan of doing tours. One day I'm doing a glacier tour and had probably 7 people on board, and the dude sitting next to just looks at me and says, "I'm the captain now," and yanks the plane 30 degrees to the right and then lets go and laughs, saying he was just kidding. There was yelling to follow via my mouth. Loki, you're a child of God for not just knocking him out the second you landed safely. I work in the backcountry ski guiding industry, working my way to becoming a lead guide. Guests are always trying to kill themselves, but here's one that stands out. Right now I mostly tail guide and pick people up when they fall, which is most of the time. One particularly deep day I'm sweeping a tree run and all of a sudden there's a man digging frantically in the snow towards a pair of legs. His wife had fallen head first down slope in a flattish area. When she lawn darted, the first half of her body was buried in the snow and only her legs and feet were visible. Her husband thought it was a good idea to stand on top where her face obviously was and start digging near the exposed part of her body. I guess in the moment he forgot about human anatomy and where her head might be. At this point I was maybe 3 minutes behind them, so she'd had her face under the surface for a while. I told him to stop and move. Yelled, "Stop, you're on her face." I tried, added a couple expletives, but nothing. I finally had to grab him by the backpack and powerbomb him down the slope. I uncovered her face in under 10 seconds. She gasped for air, had a cry, and then proceeded to tear that man to pieces verbally. Used to be a tour guide at a primate sanctuary with a strict no touching policy. At the end of the tour there's a suspension bridge. Tourists go first. Guide goes last as per the rules. I always warn the tourists that the other side is the territory of a Hanuman Langar and he doesn't frick around. Keep your distance, etc. He doesn't attack people out of nowhere, but he likes showing his teeth and screaming, which scares tourists. Anyway, one tour I get to the other side of the bridge, and a tourist got bitten. He says a monkey just bit him out of nowhere. Asked the other tourists. No, he tried to fricking pet the Hanuman. Dumbass got what he deserved. Was on a tour in New Orleans. Guy gets drunk and basically makes a fool of himself and slaps his partner. Everyone else on the tour is like, "Whoa, not cool, take a hike." GF leaves with him. Next morning they're all on the bus waiting to roll out to the next destination and we're not moving. 30 minutes later we're all getting pee off. Then the couple get on the bus looking sheepish. By the next stop we learn the drunk guy ran a bath at the hotel, passed out and it flooded the bathroom and 4 floors below into the hotel lobby. The hotel wouldn't let them leave without paying thousands of dollars. Karma for him. The poor girlfriend, though. Not a tour guide, but was doing an English language camp for foreign kids. Took the kids on a day trip to London, which involved going up the London Eye. While in the queue, one of the kids started shouting that he had a bomb in his bag and he was going to blow everyone up. Almost got all 20 kids in the group kicked out. Holy balls, the kid is lucky he's not still in jail. On an open-top tour bus in London, woman tries to dangle her toddler over the railing, then starts saying she's going to complain to my manager when I told her to stop. Caught her doing it again and company policy said that anyone endangering their kids like that was to be removed from the tour, so the driver had to come up and march her off. She still insisted she did nothing wrong. Like, she literally had the kid's feet on the side rail of the moving bus and was just holding him loosely round the waist. One low-hanging tree branch, of which there were many on the route, and that kid was gone. I was working on a tourist island in Australia when this man pulled out almost all the back feathers of a peacock because he wanted to keep one. He sneaked up behind it and grabbed a huge handful and yanked them all out. He was immediately escorted off the island. The peacock had a huge bare patch and most of its beautiful feathers were gone. I have never seen peacock enclosures that didn't have feathers on the ground. So it's doubly bad because if the guy had just been observant he probably could have gotten feathers without harming any of the birds. I used to work at a heritage site. It was an old military installation with a lot of remaining original structures, bunk beds, cafeteria equipment, computers etc. Every day it was a constant effort to remind people, read, kids, not to jump on the beds, not to slam doors open, not to punch every button like it owes them money. The absolute worst was a group of kids on a school trip. Within the first 10 minutes we're walking through the tech portion of the exhibit, where we had a wall lined with Burroughs large systems machines, B5000s, all behind this little fence about waist high. I turned to demonstrate some of the pieces, and when I look back at the group one of them had jumped over the barrier, opened one of the units and started pulling out handfuls of digital tape from the reels inside. I just about jumped on the kid when their teacher did just that. She jumped the barrier, smacked the kid's hands and took him outside. I immediately ended the tour and had them all refunded, as I couldn't imagine what else could happen. Awfully nice of you to refund them after that. They took a big crap in front of the group. So, we tour through streets and parks and make it really clear that the toilets at the beginning of the tour are the only ones for the first 90 minutes of tour. We get to a park about 30 minutes into the tour. Not a big park mind you, it is basically a big roundabout with a swing set, bench and 2 trees. I'm in the middle of my spiel in the park when I see a guy at the back of the group step away, pull his pants down and squat on the grass. Of course I was stunned and lost my flow, which had everyone looking around only to recoil in horror as this guy drops a log like it was nothing. He wasn't even ashamed. Open defecation is far too common in some countries still. Then they do that caveman garbage when they come abroad. Folks, I don't care what you do in your home country, but if you go visit a country with ample toilets, you fricking use them. I work at a brewery tap room and take people on brewery tours. During fermentation CO2 is produced and excess comes out through a runoff pipe and into a water bucket. One of the attendees, who was being a pain and trying to be funny but nobody was laughing, asked me what the pipe was for, so I gladly explained. He then asked what would happen if he breathed it in. In disbelief of his stupidity I told him he would pass out, damage his brain. He then proceeded to grab the pipe and take a breath. He was then ejected and barred. Some people are just beyond belief. Not my story, but co-worker's story. He was a tour manager for South America. We tend to work with the more older travelers, 60ish and above. Him and his guests were flying from Lima to Cusco, Peru, which is about 10,000 feet in elevation. This is a group of around 40ish travelers. Apparently, he had one male guest who had IBS or something, and while in mid-flight shat himself. The stench was unbearable as they are all in a small aircraft carrier taking them to Cusco so high in the mountains. He said he had to help escort this guy to the bathroom in the back, but as he stood up, the crap just came down his leg, so now, he's dragging crap with him to the toilet. Once he got to the toilet, he cleaned it up with the assistance of the aircraft attendant. He was very embarrassed, but not as embarrassed as the guy who pooed himself. Once they landed, this guy who shat himself is in the bathroom, apologetic, and was cleaning himself up. The guide went into the airport and bought him some new Peruvian style pants and then came back to the airport to help dress this guy in the bathroom. I would say that was probably one of the worst stories I have heard happen to an individual. I have also heard of a fellow co-worker who guides tourism in Vietnam, had to bail out a tourist from jail one time. She received a phone call in the middle of the night from him, in jail, asking for help. She showed up and asked the man, what happened? The Vietnamese police said he was caught purchasing Viagra and exchanging money for prostitution. I worked at a living history farm museum. I had a kid that was climbing on stuff the whole tour in the farmhouse and trying to get behind the smith in the blacksmith shop during a demo. After the tour, when people are allowed to roam the grounds, I hear his mom screaming and look over to the barn, and this kid has climbed the fence into the field with our longhorn oxen and is trying to poke them with a stick. I walk over and calmly told him to get out of the field before our lazy oxen decide they've had enough. But this jackoff decides to look me in the eye and smack Ted on the butt with the stick like it's a riding crop. Ted, bless him, just kinda jumps a little and whips his head around with a WTF dude look on his face. But seeing as he's a longhorn, he just wipes this kid out with one of his horns when he turned his head. Kid goes flying into the dirt and is having a meltdown. Mom is freaking out. I'm like, dude, get the heck out of the pen before Ted actually gets mad. So this kid is crying and trying to climb the fence out of the field, and Bill, who has been watching this whole thing, waits until the kid is almost over the fence and walks up to him and nudges him in the butt with his nose and pushes him off the top of the fence. It was everything I could do to keep from laughing. Kid was fine. Ted was fine. But the kid and his mom were promptly kicked out of the museum. Their dad and little sister were allowed to stay because she was well behaved and was just enjoying petting the goats at the petting zoo. So since the kid had to leave but his sister didn't, there was a temper tantrum in the parking lot that could be heard all the way to the other side of the farm. But the oxen got some extra grain that night, so I guess they won in the end. Took a class of middle schoolers to a museum and one of my butthole students dragged his hand across a 3,000-year-old Indian painting. Later on I found out the object was almost certainly a reproduction, but I nearly died of rage on the spot. Thank everything that was a reproduction, though. Not me. My best friend's tour guide on an island off the Australian coast, he saw one of the tour ignore the huge signs warning people not to go to the edge of the water. Predictably, the tourist gets hit by a huge wave, swept out to sea. I know it was the worst thing the tour guide ever saw because he and my best friend both went into the sea to rescue the tourist, and they both died. Funniest guy I ever met. Miss him most days. The tourist who caused it all, predictably he survived. Pretty sure he doesn't feel too good about the whole thing. Jesus dude. Sorry to hear that. This made national news and it's tough to hear it straight from somebody who was so close to the victims. I once was a tour guide in high school for a group of young Chinese students coming to the rural US on a sort of fresh air trip. They told us beforehand that we had to keep the kids away from water because apparently parents don't value swimming lessons in China and there is such little open swimmable water that no one learns on their own. We were also told that the kids think swimming happens naturally, like if you go into water, you'll immediately start swimming. Anyways, one of our excursions was to a local reservoir and the plan was to hike up a hill nearby to overlook the reservoir lake, get a few photos, and then leave. When we got to the top, it started pouring rain like I had never seen before. I'm talking so much rain you can't see 5 feet in front of you. Then lightning starts striking the lake and I'm still trying to keep it cool even though I had never been so close to lightning before. The students were taking it well and laughing. which was good, until they started running directly for the lake and jump in. Apparently they had also never learned about electricity conducting through water, so I'm freaking out and start pulling them out of the water. They weren't in very far, and a couple of them complained that their phones were wet in the rain. No one got hurt, but it was a crazy day. We got back on the bus and the kids started drinking liquor in the back. They ranged ages 9-16, and I had to bust them for that too. TLDR. Apparently Chinese kids think swimming will just happen if you go in water, especially lightning struck water. Well, that is awesome that you'd get those kids out. I couldn't get myself to go near that lake if there was that much lightning. Tour guide at a university. We got a lot of guests that really don't want to be there. Mostly misbehaved kids from a poor area of the city. We too ready at all times, even during finals week. As many may know, sound can travel oddly in lecture centers. Our lecture centers have windows around them, and like 6 kids thought it would be hilarious to smash on the windows. From the inside it sounds like gunshots are being shot from outside, or at least muffled gunshots. Watched 100 plus students flee the classroom during their final exam. We got a lot of crap for that. It isn't easy corralling a group of 30 plus students. That's the chaperone's job. I watched a man run up the side of the platform the winged victory statue is on in the Louvre and throw his arm around it for a photo. Security got him down pretty quickly. I'm shocked he actually made it up there. I'm in the middle of talking and someone's phone rings. Okay, that happens sometimes, and usually they just cancel the call or step outside. Nope. This guy answers the call and starts talking on the phone, only a few meters from where I'm standing. I think, oh, he'll just quickly explain he's busy and end the call. Nope. He starts a conversation. The rest of the group glare at him and I'm put in an awkward position because my workplace put a huge emphasis on politeness. So I suggest to him to continue his call in the hallway, just outside the room we were in. To which he replied, no, I'm fine here, and went back to his phone conversation. I'm doing my best to talk to the rest of the group, about 25 people, but he's so loud. Eventually this Chinese woman yells across the room at him, shut up, we want to listen to the lady, not you, which worked. But I just couldn't imagine the nerve to ruin everyone's experience like that, cause you're too selfish to talk on the phone outside. Also, the place I worked allowed photos but had a strict no photos of the staff rule for privacy reasons. I always explained this at the start and 99% of people were cool. One day I had a particularly happy snapper who got right up in a staff member's face to take a photo, like I'm taking centimeters from his face to take a photo. The staffer was just some rando middle-aged white dude. So I'm not sure why the fascination, but he was livid. It's like I saw it happen in slow motion so couldn't do anything to stop it. That guy was removed from the tour. I had a guest, snorkeling, try and grab the tail of a barracuda as he swam up behind it. Luckily I was able to hit the guest with a dive fin from the boat to stop him before he got a hold. If he had grabbed on, I'm sure he would have been ripped to pieces by that fish. Couple of guys I used to play cricket with went on a school trip to Auschwitz and decided to steal a small pair of glasses and some buttons they found half buried in the ground. They were detained by Polish police while they were leaving the site. Hard to know what goes through people's heads sometimes. On the subject of Auschwitz, I worked with a dude whose go-to badass story is that he snorted coke while walking around Auschwitz. I've probably heard him tell 25 people or so the same story and every person kind of looks at him like he's a freaking piece of crap and then they try and change the subject. To this day I don't think he understands why no one sees it as badass. Not a tour guide, but I guess you could say I work in the tourism industry. I work ground crew for a company that does helicopter tours. Number 1 rule for customers is don't walk under the tail boom. The rotor will kill you and it will hurt. It's unbelievable how many people have a death wish out there. People see the fastest way to the other side of the helicopter and don't stop to think, oh hey, that spinning blade may or may not slice my whole freaking head off, let's see how close we can get to it. Tour guide boat captain in the Caribbean. We had about 40-50 people on the boat, got off. We would normally go feed swimming pigs, which someone would get nipped from them from doing stupid crap, but nothing too serious. Well, the next stop after that was another island where we would hand feed turtle, sharks, and stingrays. So we would tell the people to hold it with the palm open and food in the middle for the stingrays, and they would come over the top and take it out. The turtles and the sharks put it in the water holding it in the tips, and when they are coming for it, let go. Well, of course, this dingus decided he would be tough and feed this baby shark no longer than your forearm without letting go. Shark proceeds to bite his fingers. He screams and jumps up out of the water and flicks it off of his hand, pulling one of his fingernails off in the process. So that's one I always remember. I used to give tours at my university. There was a group of middle schoolers I was giving a tour to show them why they should want to go college. Yatta yatta. There was this one kid who kept trying to sneak away and was whistling at just about every girl who walked by. Weird, okay, whatever. He thinks he's a big shot. Then a very attractive girl comes jogging by us, and he tried to grab her and starts air humping while he watches her run away from us. I was mortified. I ended the tour. I was done with him. The teachers didn't even care. That was probably the worst part. Didn't happen to me, but one of my company's tour guides was on a flight with a bunch of middle schoolers. One of the boys got caught jerking it in his seat next to a girl who wasn't even from his school. I don't know what to say. What goes through your mind at that moment that makes you think that's a good idea? Former whitewater rafting guide. There's a calmer section of the river people can, if they choose to, hop out and swim through. They are wearing life jackets so you can just float through it. This woman decides she wants to try it and hops out. After she pops up, she slowly tilts forward until just the back of her jacket is out of the water and she's completely still. After 5 or so seconds of this, I start to realize this might not be intentional and paddle over and physically pick her head up above the water, followed by her gasping for air. I haul her in the boat and ask what happened. She said she didn't know what to do as she'd never been submerged in water before. 1. Why are you on a whitewater rafting trip? 2. Why didn't your strategy involve moving your body? The life vest can only help you so far. My cousin is a tourist guide and biologist. Most of his tours are in Africa. He instructed his group of 25 people, including kids, not to wear any type of earrings or collars, especially shiny stuff, since they were about to go into a thick forest to try to see a bunch of animals. This is very important because 2025 make a lot of noise, which makes wild animals run away or hide. It's even worse if they are wearing shiny stuff they can spot from far away. Okay, so this woman complains, decides to wear shiny earrings anyway. Cousin tells her to get rid of them or she ain't coming with the group, so she obeys but puts them on a bit later. Some species of monkeys in that area love shiny stuff. They ripped the earrings from her ears. I was on a tour with my family in Cambodia and we visited Angkor Wat. Now, as everyone knows, Angkor Wat is teeming with tourists day and night. There was a long line to climb the Bacan, basically the topmost tower, wherein the steps are very steep. It was a hot day, and when it was almost our turn, a middle-aged man took 2 steps, fell backward and started having a seizure. People came to his help immediately. However, one man who was also crowding around him did nothing but pull out his cell phone and start recording. Thankfully, everyone noticed and started yelling at the guide to put that crap away. He acted like the victim though, and he said he was just trying to help. What a T. Imagine deciding to film a guy having a seizure instead of calling him a freaking ambulance. Sick help, bruh. Definitely a T. I was giving a tour of my university to the mother of a potential student. She tried to recruit me into a popular pyramid scheme, and then, when I tried to change the subject by asking what she did in her spare time, she told me about her conspiracy theories that she gives public talks on. They included the dangers of Wi-Fi, 5G, and chemtrails, and that the moon landings were faked by Stanley Kubrick, who was shortly thereafter assassinated by the CIA and replaced by a clone. I cut the tour short. Felt pretty sorry for her daughter, who appeared to think these theories were reasonable and had also been recruited into her mother's pyramid scheme at 17. Was on a tour of a small cave system somewhere in West Texas. It was really beautiful, and right after the guide told us how long it took for all the stalagmites and stalactites to form, she turned around to move on and some guy leans way over and snaps off a small one and shoved it in his pocket. I was so surprised I just stared at him, and he smiled and winked at me like we had really gotten away with something and I was a co-conspirator or something. I think I learned this from Reddit. Give him a thumbs down. They always look startled, then sad, but no one has ever become confrontational. They usually slink off or avoid eye contact if they can't leave. I mostly do it to people who don't pick up their dog crap. Most will awkwardly pretend they meant to wander back. Reddit, what's the worst culture shock you've ever had while traveling? I went from a dry country, Australia, to Ohio and found that everything is green. If you need water, you just dig a hole in the ground. Took me a second there. On first reading I thought you meant dry as in alcohol free and I was very confused. I once saw a mob crush a man's head with a motorcycle battery because he had been caught trying to steal said battery. The cops just watched him getting beaten, run over, and finally bludgeoned. East Africa is a scary place sometimes. Oh, yeah, I mean, we got our house robbed once and our guardian called over all the guards from the neighborhood. It was a freaking manhunt. They had tree roots for bludgeons. I kid you not. If they'd found the guy, he was dead. We fervently hope they wouldn't find him. Barefoot people everywhere in New Zealand. In Starbucks, in the mall, on public transit, walking down the street. No shoes, no socks, no fricks to give. Silly hobbits. Truck playing music while driving down streets of Taipei. I commented that it might be an ice cream truck. My host looked at me funny and replied, that's the garbage truck. If we want ice cream, we go to the 7-Eleven store. Haha. I went to Taipei in November and my brother and I were also wondering why there was an ice cream truck. Nope, just a garbage truck blaring out fur-a-lees to let people know that they were coming by to pick up the trash. I went to Greece this past January and we went into this little t-shirt shop. The lady asked where we were from and we said Chicago since it was the closest to where we actually were. She then goes, I've always wanted to go to Chicago. I love black people. Had no idea how to respond to that. This is not as good a story as a lot of these here. Just saying up front. I live in the Netherlands. Water is all around me. From the sea, to the canals, to waterways dividing the fields between different farms. The first time I visited Iowa and drove around there, it took me a couple of days to realize there wasn't any water between the fields and acres. Sure, there's a river and whatnot, but essentially it's just endless actual ground. It made me feel uneasy for a couple of minutes. Iowa, every foreigner's vacation destination. I am an American living in the poorest province in China and I have been thanked repeatedly for dropping the atomic bombs on those Japanese monkeys. I have also spoken to someone who believes that all black people have AIDS and they are responsible for spreading it to the rest of the world. I moved from the US to Moscow. The first 2 weeks were an absolute nightmare since Moscow is about 18x larger than my home city. My favorite culture shock experience is on my second day getting lost in the train system for hours. The train system, as amazing and efficient as it is, you can get lost for days if you don't know it. The Moscow metro is so horrifying they made a game and book series on it. I joke. Okay, so in Norway, where I'm from, social anxiety is integrated in our culture. We don't talk to strangers unless we have to. We're never unnecessarily polite. Even the people working in stores won't talk to you unless you ask for it. Look lost. So when I came to New York and the people working in stores asked me how I was completely floored. Not only did they talk to me the second I came in the door, they actually asked me how I felt. I got so freaked out I ended up avoiding stores altogether until I built up the courage. Took me like 3 days. Even then, going into a store was super stressful to me and I almost always ended up blushing and stuttering instead of saying fine thanks. How are you? To which they just didn't reply. So weird. Wasn't sure how antisocial you meant. Then you said people in NYC were polite. That's a pretty low baseline. Moved to and started driving in Poland. Everyone drove as if the speed limit signs were in imperial rather than metric. Then I went on a trip to India, Calcutta, and I saw real driving. When I returned to Poland I realized that Polish traffic is way more insane than it ought to be, but not really insane. We act like our speed limits are more what you'd call guidelines than actual limits. Back when me and my family flew to America my first time, we landed in Houston to switch planes and went to a fast food diner in the airport. I ordered a milkshake and not only was it served in a cup that was like twice my size, they also gave me the shaker in which it was made so no ice cream is left behind. At that moment I was assured I was gonna love America. Went on a school trip from the UK to the US as a kid and it was the first time any of us had been there. It was a hot day in DC. My friend ordered the largest soda he could. We'd never seen anything like it. He was carrying this giant bucket around all day in both hands and always looking for a bathroom. The Chinese toilets that are just holes in the ground. It is even worse in the countryside, where there are no walls and you just don't look at each other when squatting. And everything falls in this smelly ditch underneath where you can actually see all the poop. That's not just small towns. You can find wall-less bathrooms in the major cities as well. Been in one in Beijing and Shanghai. It's extra weird when your knees rub against the guys next to you. What is with American toilet stalls having the doors end like 2 feet away from the ground? Every time I took a crap I was half expecting to see someone poke their head under because of how much space there is. And sometimes little kids do exactly that. I was in Germany a couple years ago with a friend of a friend who was born in the Soviet Union and who still lives in a former Soviet satellite. Someone tried to get us to sign a petition. After the guy left, I had to explain the concept of a petition and he said, "Oh, in my country if you want to change the government you just disappear." Flashbacks to 1984. I'm currently living in Japan, originally from the US. The store employees. I knew that they're known for being very polite and following specific, set codes of conduct, but honestly I was so shocked at first. When I arrived I had to wait in the airport mall for my bus, and I just sat there for over an hour watching them. One sales lady was passing out food samples. She stood outside the store and called out a scripted sales pitch, gestured, smiled, and bowed. Exactly the same words. Exactly the same intonation. Exactly the same pattern of gesture. Smile. Bow. Over and over and over. It was like watching a robot. Even her eye movements and the way she moved were very stiff and machine-like. People completely ignored her, making it seem even more like she was just an object. Eventually I went over to get a sample from her and she was quite nice and talkative. Just a regular lady doing her job. But until she snapped out of the sales lady script it was almost terrifying. Not all salespeople are so extreme but they do follow specific, set scripts and they basically expect customers to either completely ignore them or give short, almost curt sounding replies. When I spoke to them using polite level speech, bowed back, etc., they would get pretty upset. They started using extremely polite speech and bowing really low, like they were horrified that I wasn't talking down to them. Eventually I figured out that it was actually rude of me to be too polite, or at least my idea of polite. It was embarrassing to them. It really drove home to me that sometimes your gut reaction of what's the right thing to do can be completely wrong. Feudal Japan is still strong in mannerism, politeness and being Japanese. But Korea also got the old-aged position over actual experience sort of reverence. If you're older you're automatically respected by the younger generation in speech and conduct. Inside they are probably just as annoyed as you and me though. It's probably a stupid thing but being from Australia and visiting Europe I was shocked that to use public toilets you have to pay. I'd agree with it in principle that it helps with upkeep, cleaning etc. However almost everyone we used were filthy and definitely not looked after. Even worse I found were the ones with the old women sitting at the entrance who'd yell at you if you couldn't find enough coins to appease her. Also interesting that even places like train stations and shopping centers do this. We were floored when we finally found the only toilet that was open to the public at the McDonald's opposite checkpoint Charlie in Berlin. Made our freaking day. I was traveling with toddler and a middle-aged woman ergo the obsession with needing toilets. This is just a thing in silly southern Europe, Germany. They're insane about toilets there for some reason. Come to Scandinavia where we don't charge people for basic human needs like taking a crap. When I went to London, all the faucets and all the public bathrooms had handles so you could turn the water on and off like a freaking adult, and all the stall doors went all the way to the floor. Went to Egypt last summer. We had hired a personal tour guide because there was no way we would be walking around by ourselves in Egypt. The service came with an Egyptian government security guard to protect us. and at one point my mother asked our tour guide, not the guard, what he thought of the government right then, and he said it was great. Later when the guard was getting us into a site, the tour guide told my mom not to ask questions like that in front of the guard because he, the tour guide, could be punished for talking negatively about the government. Really scared me. After traveling wide and far, be very wary of talking about politics or religion, unless it's naturally part of the conversation. Being treated like a minor celebrity for being white in some parts of Asia. Having random strangers come up to me to tell me that I am so handsome, both men and women. Having nearly everyone I interact with try to set me up with their daughter's friends themselves. So in Italy, being a server at a restaurant is a respectable career, and they are paid pretty well. It took me way longer than I would have liked to figure out why all the wait staff I came across was very grateful for my 15% tips. The US North America is pretty much the only place in the world where tipping is mandatory or expected as far as I know. Pay your goddamn employees. On my first day in Tokyo, spending an entire train journey with two small girls, probably 4 or 5 years old, staring at me inches from my face like they had never seen a white guy before. The mother looked terribly embarrassed but didn't try to stop them. Queuing up in a shop and being asked to stand in a different line where there was a white guy that spoke English at the counter for that line. Discovering that Japanese pavements get dangerously slippery when it's been raining because of how clean the pavements are. There's no friction at all. Going into a trendy cafe in Shibuya that was blasting out incredibly vulgar gangster rap music during the middle of the day. The lyrics were in English, so I guess that the owners of the cafe didn't know how inappropriate it was. I think it's more that I culture shocked somebody else. My husband, then boyfriend, and I went to stay with his mom's cousin in Argentina. They had a sort of live-in housekeeper who cleaned and took care of their disabled son. But I didn't really know what all of her duties entailed. Why would I need to? We woke up earlier than she did one day, walked to the store on the corner and bought some eggs, and went home and made ourselves some fried egg sandwiches. Apparently, in Argentina, it's 1. Totally weird to eat eggs for breakfast, and 2. Completely weird to make your own breakfast that you want rather than waiting for this other person to serve you the breakfast she wants to make. This trip was like 5 years ago and the family still talks about the time the American cousins made their own eggs for breakfast. That's only wealthy people. It happens in Chile too. Chatting to a tuk-tuk driver we retained to stay with us in Cambodia. We asked him, what do you do in your free time? He said, what you mean? We said, what do you do when you are not driving your tuk-tuk? He said, what you mean? I sleep. The fact that the concept of any free time at all was alien to him made me seriously realize my privilege of birth. Sobering. Rio de Janeiro. The small children selling gum on busy streets all day and night. The beggars everywhere. Every building had bars on the windows. Armed guards at the doors of the hotel. The enormous shanty towns on the mountainsides. Traveling on business, and it's the only place my boss insisted I have a driver. For safety reasons. While I was there, the beaches were robbed. A line of robbers from the water's edge to the street behind, and it was a wide beach. Basically went from one end to the other, a mile, and robbed everyone there. Hundreds of people. Also the inflation rate was so high my dollars were worth noticeably more. 15% by the end of the week, and the dollar was definitely the preferred currency, even for large commercial events like my conference. On the plus side, the people as a whole were beautiful and wore almost no clothes. Small bikinis, no matter your age or sex. Bikinis were not unusual all over the city, sometimes wrapped in Paris. I don't know where people kept their money. No one carried purses. I was told that was because they'd be stolen. In Beijing, old fat men do this thing called the Beijing bikini, where they tuck the bottom of their t-shirt into the neck to expose their gut. It wasn't exactly a shock, but it was hilarious. They also let their kids crap on the floor. I got off a long-haul flight from New Zealand via Singapore at Heathrow and watched a bunch of security guards carrying more firepower than our entire police force. That was an eye-opener for sure. Going from having never seen more than a .308 rifle to having these guys stroll past was unsettling. Airport security are basically the only police in the UK that have guns, apart from special armed response units. tall white guy from Chicago. Went to Mexico City to practice my Spanish and visit the pyramids of Teotihuacan. Everywhere I go, children and teenagers would run up and ask if they could take a picture with me. By the third day it was explained to me what was going on. The kids who are in English language classes get extra credit for engaging in a conversation with a native English speaker, and they have to have photos or video on their cell to prove it. In Mexico they encourage their young children to approach strangers in public. Apparently, they don't seem to have an equivalent Nancy Grace. Meeting countless folks in Honduras that had no running water or electricity at home. Expected. Then finding out they owned cell phones and laptops. I was in UK on work experience program from Czech Republic, and I was told to be always polite, that British are very strict about good customs. People that were exact opposite of what we've been taught. They didn't give a dang about greetings and good manners. People were very open-hearted and told you literally everything that's been on their minds. Cashiers in supermarkets would sometimes try to initiate conversations. I got complimented on my long hair and other things. One of them was curious about my accent and treated me for a cup of coffee after the shift. On the other hand, they were apologizing for almost everything. A lot of times I just evaded other people on streets and they apologized. It almost drove me mad. As a Canadian, I fail to see what's wrong here. LOL. Billboards while driving through the states. I'm from Canada. Good lord, nowhere in Canada would you see a billboard that says Jesus would keep the baby. The women in the Caribbean were much more flirtatious and forward than back home. It made me super nervous. I had a girl approach me in a Wendy's of all places and ask if my friend and I would like to join her and some friends at the beach. My buddy and I keep arguing about whether they were H and we were going to get drugged and mugged. Nope, just some teachers who thought we were attractive. That happened multiple times over the years, and practically never happens in the US. I can count on one hand the amount of times I've been approached by a woman while on American soil. Anytime I go abroad, especially to the Caribbean, it happens multiple times. I still don't understand. Time to book my tickets, I guess. Going to Dr. Congo where police walk around the streets with what appear to be AK-47s. The traffic is essentially lawless and you'll have piles of traffic 3-4 cars wide attempting to merge into a single lane because everybody is trying to pass each other using the footpath and the opposing traffic lane. The electricity in the city can be only on in certain areas for a few hours in the dead of night because there's not enough supply and it gets diverted to the city center during the day and evening. If you are of certain races, for example, white Indian, you are considered rich by virtue of your skin tone regardless of how much money you actually have. Wasn't really a shock for me because I knew before I visited that this is what it is like, but it could be a great shock for somebody who's not prepared for it. A very different place to Australia. When I went to Italy with my family and learned that all restaurants and most businesses are closed on Sundays. Being a hick from the US, that blew my 13-year-old mind. Little girl in Bangkok selling animal figures made out of palm leaves or grass for about 12 hours. When I was 6 we moved to America for a year, so every morning we had to do the Pledge of Allegiance, and because I was from Germany I had no idea what it was, so I acted like I knew what I was doing. I live in America, and a lot of people have that this is kind of creepy realization around 8th grade, when they become teenagers. Once you get to high school, a lot of people stand, but don't say it, or continue working on schoolwork while the pledge is said over the loudspeaker. I think as the years go on, less and less people will actually say it, but that's just a prediction. When I was about 21 I went for my first trip outside Europe. It was also my first plane ride. It was a work placement in Nigeria. I was out in the middle of nowhere doing some survey work for oil. There were many culture shocks. Everything was fascinating and partly intimidating. And for the most part during the day it was me in the jungles, villages or swamps with the locals. The culture shock came for me when I was driving back at the end of the day, after having been there for a month or so, and I saw another white guy driving in the opposite direction on the road. It was the first unknown and the wild white guy I had seen for weeks. The culture shock thing for me was that his face, sitting there in the passenger seat of a Land Rover, looked almost non-human, like a fat pink pig. It was like I could momentarily see white people through the eyes of the villagers, having not seen one for so long. I still see that similarity when I look at a picture of Vernon Dursley in the Harry Potter movies. His face, sitting there in the passenger seat, that phrase conjured up a very grotesque image. Ordering iced tea in a restaurant in America. In Canada, when you order iced tea you get what Americans call sweet tea. Unsweetened iced tea is basically not a thing in Canada. At least, I have never seen it. Imagine my surprise the first time I ordered iced tea in America expecting a sweet drink. Yeah, this really matters where you are. A lot of areas in the South would give you 99% sugar sweet tea if you asked for an iced tea. I was an American white woman living in Vietnam, and I made friends with a Vietnamese woman who could speak English. We were talking about our situations growing up and I told her about how mine was pretty crap. Abusive parents, constantly sick, constantly hungry, etc. She was in no way trying to best me when she said the following. She just calmly told me the story about how her family kept trying to talk her into being sold into marriage or prostitution so her brothers could get a better education. Turns out that's a very common practice for rural Vietnamese families. Now, my life growing up was pretty crap, but never once did my family try to sell me into the sex trade. It really put things into perspective and made me thankful for how good even the worst of times were for me. I just went to a Thai wedding. At one point, a very drunk middle-aged obese woman was thrusting a wooden phallus in my face while walking the groom, whose name I don't know, down a highway holding an umbrella to keep the sun off of him. Visited Gatlinburg, Tennessee to see the Great Smoky Mountains. I'm Canadian and it was like a living stereotype. I was there around the time of some political event involving the Confederate flag, so they held a flag rally in the city. It was this massive line of giant pickup trucks with the Confederate flag on top. It was weird, but even weirder is that there were people with pistols in holsters on their belt. I'd never seen a gun that close before, and they were just walking around with that. Yay, that's America in Republican Outback. The funny TV show On a Plane to Saudi Arabia where the guy beats his wife for back talking him with a shoe. Same trip the military trade show in Abu Dhabi. Some next level shady crap. But what the frick? I, an American, lived in Germany for several years in college. They have an obsession with fresh air, which mostly I loved. However, I got into a full-on, verbal, fight with a girl because I wanted to close the window in a public bathroom in January. To top it off, it was one of the snowiest winters in a long time, 2008/9, and I was in Hamburg, which is a northern port city. I just couldn't handle having my butt freeze to the toilet seat anymore. I am from the UK, Russia, the roads. I went to Moscow and St. Petersburg and the roads were terrifying. There was one that was at least 6 lanes wide and had no crossings at all. We just ran and hoped. Also, I expected Russians to be super scary and the opposite was true. I found everyone to be really friendly. Germany, efficiency. That stereotype is true. I have never had such quick service and such a good experience on a city metro. Also, the people were friendly as long as you didn't interrupt them. In London, it's very much head down and don't talk to me attitude. Italy, wonderful food all the time. It ruined eating out for me because literally everything I ate was the best version of that food I'd ever had. Also, people selling things by going right in your face. That was quite unnerving. I loved traveling though. Culture shocks are all part of the experience. Redditors who one day just said, "Foo it," and quit their job to travel the world. How did it all work out? Worked out really well. Hardest part was convincing my wife that it wasn't as high risk as she thought it would be. I had no idea of the risk involved tbh. Took a year out to travel overseas, came in well under budget, thanks to my soul's frugality, and got the offer of a new job 3 months before heading back. I'm in that job now and I'm already planning on doing it again. Got early approval from my wife this time too. I did what you are talking about at 21. I had a low paying but enjoyable job but was feeling a little unfulfilled. I'd been working hard for very little money since I was 16 and had little to show for it. I went online and paid for a New Zealand working holiday visa. It was granted and I had up to a year to save up enough money to make the trip viable. Went to NZ about 7 months later, worked my way around, got drunk a bit, made friends, saw things, met a girl. She followed me back to the UK and we decided to put all our energy into her skill, which is writing. 6 years later we have a successful writing travel business and have traveled over 50 countries. I'm lucky, but I was also a little brave and worked hard. I'd rather have failed trying to do something I wanted to do than had success at something that did not fulfill me. I was young, I was bored at work and didn't want to go back to university. I saw an ad in the paper saying come to Germany and be an au pair. I thought it would be a year. I'd learn another language, see a bit more of Europe and have a chance to think about what to do next. That was 23 years ago and I still live in Europe. I just announced to my employer this last week that I'll be quitting this summer. My wife and I are getting rid of most of our stuff, selling our house, and we'll be traveling for a year across the US and Canada with our 2 kids in a vintage travel trailer we've refurbished. I'll report back in a year. I'll be waiting. D. I didn't quit my job. I just took 3 months off and drove from Key West to Prudhoe Bay AK on the Arctic Ocean and back one summer. I saw 2 friends along the way for a night but otherwise was alone for the summer, mostly camping or sleeping in my car. It was the best summer of my life and gave me the reset I was looking for to go back to all the things I was doing in my life. It's been 6.5 years since I did it and everything on my life has been better. I'm dealing with more stressful things now and handling it much better. If you like to drive, I highly recommend making the trip. Out west you can go for days only talking to people at gas stations. You can do 133 on the Bonneville Salt Flats and pay $750 to get towed off of them when you hit a wet spot. You can see the Milky Way next to White Sands. You can put your feet in the Arctic Ocean, stand down an Arctic Wolf. Watch the reaction on the mechanic's face in Seattle when you get an oil change twice in 2 weeks and watch as he realizes that it's not even his sticker on your windshield the second time. You can change 2 flats at once. Have a kitchen crew give you a standing ovation when they hear you drove from Florida to have their salmon. You can see the things you wanted to but never had the chance and the things you never knew you wanted to because when you see something you can just go. You can camp at 12,000 feet by a lake. Spend a day on top of a 14k mountain. You can play in the snow in April and in the sun at midnight. Take 3 months off. Get in the car and drive. Do a bit of planning. Mostly get your car in shape. Buy extra full-sized spares and if you feel it's necessary buy. Train with aunt, learn how to get a firearm into Canada. I needed it though, didn't actually fire. I had a good job and was just bored. The wife and I were just doing the same crap over and over in town. Movies, dining out, going to the lake, bonfires. It was a good life. Just boring after a while. I decided I wanted to get out and go see Europe. We started saving money and 2 years later we went. It was amazing. I had 18 days off work and felt like I was living my dream. We went back home and 10 months later, I wanted to move to Europe. So here I am typing at work, from Europe, and we've been here 3 years so far. Best experience of my life. Follow your dreams. Not me, but a relatively close friend of mine. She was involved in a pretty bad car accident and had a life-changing epiphany. She realized that life is too short and she should just quit her Fortune 100 accounting job and travel the world. So she did. She left a very high-paying job with zero notice and flew to Europe and spent just over a year there. Says it was the best time of her life. However, when she came back she had a dose of reality. She ghosted pretty much everyone she knew, so she had trouble finding places to live. She also spent over 6 months looking for a job because no accounting firm would hire her since she either had a huge time gap on her resume or would have to explain why she just left her high-paying job. She ended up settling for some mid $40,000 a year job, which was a huge pay cut compared to her original job of around $100K. Says sometimes she regrets it because she feels her career has been fricked, but also says she wouldn't trade the experience she had for anything. Just depends on the days and when bills are due. Had a great job right out of college. I just hated it. I made a ton of money but I was so bored and literally counting the seconds until 5 PM so I could leave. I was in a city that I just didn't agree with. Made the gut decision to quit one day. I didn't travel the world, but I took a month off of life and really just figured out what I wanted. Ended up driving across the country, starting a new career, and have spent almost 2 years to the day happier than anything. I make a lot less, work a ton more, but I'm glad I took the risk because dang is it worth it. Wrecked my car the day I was going to leave, ended up living jobless and carless in my mom's extra bedroom for 6 months. Are you planning to do this? I feel like you're wanting someone to tell you do it, which, if that's the case, then I'll be that person. Either do it right now, or set a hard date to do it in the near future to get the logistics sorted. But either way, do it. If it's not the case, then ignore this post. Right now I don't want to do this, but the idea was always appealing to me, so I wanted to know how it worked out for others. I decided to uproot my whole life and move to Puerto Rico with a friend. We've been here a little over a month and I want to go back. I am going back in a few weeks for sure, hopefully sooner. It feels unsafe pretty much everywhere. I don't speak Spanish fluently so there is almost always problems with communication. Majority of houses don't have a sea, nor does mine, so it's always hot and humid. The internet has 2 speeds, slow and not working. Beautiful ocean views can only make up for so much. I'm tired of it all. 99% of the posts are of the I've never looked back type stories. Best of luck getting back. Had the most mind-numbing, boring job at the worst call center. One good thing was that money piled up since I had no life due to 3-hour-day commuting. I said frick this and decided to overhaul my life. Lose weight and travel the world to cure my introvertism. It wasn't all bad, but I can tell you that to travel the world alone as an introvert was probably the worst idea ever. Being too shy to make contact with people. Staying at my hostel because night outside in strange countries are scary and so on doesn't really expand your horizons. Then I went to USA and got stuck in a small backwater town in Wisconsin for a few months with winter flirt before heading home. Went back to Sweden. Flopped about a bit and then went back to my old job for another few years before finding something better. All in all, it was well worth it, but I think I would have a much better time with a friend for the trip to do things with and who would push me to do stuff. Pretty good. Now live on the other side of the world with wife and 2 kids, doing a job that doesn't exist in any meaningful way in my home country. What you may not realize is that doing exactly this, going traveling for at least 6 months, more often a year or more, is pretty dang common for young adults in almost every Western country in the world except for the US. But those college debts keep you guys chained to the floor. I never made the debt connection to travel in the US until now. That sucks. Did this in 2009 at the age of 27. Quit my job as a senior programmer at a major US bank to visit Australia for a month. Immediately met a girl that liked adventure, so we decided to live and travel together. We dated for 5 years and lived in 15 countries. Half were Asian countries because they're cheap and close to us. The constant travel and separation from our friends and family took a toll and eventually we both wanted something different. That was almost 3 years ago. Still love travel. Total number of countries I visited currently stands at 26. Currently living in Laos with a pretty easy and carefree life. No stress at all. Bliss. I graduated in 2012 at the tail end of the recession UK and immediately left for New Zealand. It didn't work out. I made all the classic mistakes. Returning home, the job market was absolutely horrific and all I could get was 14 hours a week at the university I graduated from. I then got an interview at a very large media agency and then a second interview. I finally thought this is it, only to fall at the last hurdle. I had enough money for a plane ticket and a bit to live on. I said frick it, threw some clothes in a bag and moved to Toronto. Immediately got a well-paid government job and met my Australian girlfriend not long after getting there. I learned French, went to Paris, went to San Francisco, Burning Man, Montreal, Paris again, Montreal again, Hawaii, New Caledonia, and I now live in Sydney with the Australian girl I've told you about. We've been together over 3 years now. Tomorrow I have an interview at the Department of Education. 14 hours a week. Single, with limited possibilities and barely enough spare cash to scratch 2 pennies together. Today, I'd say it went fricking spectacularly. I know a guy who said frick it and took out a large loan and backpacked across Europe after high school. He now, 30, works entry-level factory jobs, nothing wrong with that, and lives paycheck to paycheck with his son. He lives a stressful life, but regrets nothing. I quit my job, got rid of all my stuff, and set out to travel the world. My goal was to circumnavigate over the next year, but I only made it 3 months. Turns out if you're running away from life due to depression, you won't get very far. I think my travels might have been better had I started in South America or Europe. Due to less of a cultural and language barrier, I started in Korea. Even though it was only 3 months, I definitely grew as a person. I'd recommend it to everyone, even those with depression. Just have realistic goals, and don't be afraid to fail. A little over a year ago, my wife and I decided to pack it all in a backpack, quit our jobs for a year and travel. We made it 51 weeks and 28 countries before returning to work. Before we left, we were comfortable in our lives, working 40 hours a week and not really having the time to enjoy one another. We had stuff, money, but no experience. After coming home, we downsized from our previous lives and hope to continue down a path of being fairly minimalistic. Congrats. Sounds like it was really worth it. Hope you succeed with your lifestyle. Told my boss I want to see the world. Was sent to Asia for some months. Back for a few months now. Permanently moving to Hong Kong in July. I had a crappy job working in a tax office. It was inhumane. My American girlfriend at the time was about to finish her summer program in England. After her studies, she had planned to backpack around Europe with her friend. We were both naive. We can Skype about our prospects, but we both feared it wouldn't work, that the distance would kill it. As a final huzzah, I decided to plan a long weekend away in one of her stops. So I booked a Friday off of work and I flew out on a Thursday evening to Berlin to spend a final weekend with her. Me, my girl and her friend then spent an awesome 3 days in Berlin, drinking, and drinking. We had some German friends there also, equally charming and charismatic. Monday came and my flight was scheduled in the afternoon. I packed up my things and proceeded to walk to the lobby of the hostel. We were all gathered there, chit-chatting. Internally I was dying. I thought to myself, here is this girl who likes you, who actually likes you, and you're about to fly home to some godforsaken town to go back to some godforsaken job that you hate. Then, completely out of left field, and totally against my usual character, I asked myself this question: do you really have to go back? I pondered this for a few minutes before I broached it with the group. They were all receptive to the idea, thrilled as a matter of fact. But it was one girl in particular, our mutual German friend, who really solidified the idea in my mind. She turned to me and, quite matter-of-factly, as some Germans have the glorious habit of doing, said, would you rather go home to your crappy job, or stay and spend time with your girl? Well, you can pretty guess my decision. I ended up quitting my crappy job so that I could backpack across Europe for 6 weeks. Years later I married that girl and emigrated to the US to start a new life here with her. Life is good. Kinda sucks. Ended up settling down in a foreign country and I miss my family back home. I didn't do it as abruptly as you described. I quit a job and took a course in teaching English in Barcelona, then got a job teaching English, and did it for a few years in 2 countries. It was fun but got old after a while, so I went home. At first going home was difficult, because while everyone will say something like wow what a great experience, it doesn't actually mean much for employers, and the certifications aren't really good for much. I ended up working 2 jobs, a few hours at each, until one started giving me more responsibility. I did it and I'm in Vietnam at the moment. Quit my job. I rent out my apartment. Don't regret a second of it. It has its downsides of course, but the perspective you get on life around the planet is worth everything. I warmly recommended Cambodia. Interesting country, friendly people and a horrible history. Go for it. Life's short. Ran out of cash. Stuck in Syria. PLS send help. Currently doing this, Been in Vietnam 3 months and head to Laos tomorrow. Quit my job a few years ago in the UK in a crap call center and went traveling but had a closed mind about it. Traveled for 9 months, then came home and regretted it after a week, but figured I'd got the traveling out of my system and now I can focus on finding a career. This was back in 2014. Fast forward to June 2016 and I'm looking at flights around the world from my hometown in Manchester. Saw a cheap flight to Vietnam and instantly thought frick JT and booked it. I had around 6 months to sell as much of my crap as I could and save as much as I could and then head off traveling. My job at the time was pretty dull, was in another call center but was making footsteps into working my way up in the business. Only thing I didn't manage to sell was my car, which is sat on my parents' driveway back home. Every time I feel homesick I remember the regret of coming home too early. This time round I wanna travel as long as I can. I have a decent amount of funds before I need to work. Been in Vietnam 3 months and head to Laos tomorrow as I said, then Cambodia and Thailand. Then I'm planning on coming back to Vietnam to find some work and then eventually on to New Zealand to work over there too. The first time I traveled with a friend. This time I'm doing it solo and it's the best decision I've ever made. This sounds like something I would really like to try for myself. My only concern is that I won't be as lucky and won't manage to get enough money to start my journey. Oh, pick me. I graduated college and got a real job for 18 months and then said frick it and went to travel the world. It was a blast, I loved it. I went all the way around the world and ended up in Australia. A company gave me a long stay visa and I would have been making good money, but for a lot of reasons I wanted to come back. I had a couple friends working at a small company and I got a nice raise from when I left. It's been very easy getting back into my old life. I have a nice apartment and everything is stable again. This trip cost me $30,000 but 7-8k was getting my life back together in Denver. The biggest takeaway I had from my trip around the world is that it's easy to think the next place or trip will make you happy, but it won't. You have to be happy with yourself. There is no car or bag or destination that can do that. It's an interesting thing to realize. Lots of people travel for lots of different reasons and by default it has an element of escapism in it. But traveling won't solve your problems, and often looking for the answer won't help if you don't know the question. I still travel a lot. I was in Italy and Amsterdam in November, Mexico in January, Aspen next weekend, then Nick in April. But I do it differently. I will definitely take another round the world trip, probably at 30. Only one job interviewer had any sort of issue with my trip and that guy was a dong. I'm living on the other side of the world 5 years later. I cashed out stock options, quit my job at 24 and drove across country to live in California. I was off the grid for 2 months during my road trip, camping across America and smoking a lot of weed and having a lot of physical relationships. 2 years later, I am right now on my way back from California, unemployed, prideless, and penniless. While I'm pretty depressed and don't know how to start living my life back together, I'm glad I did it. I know where my breaking point is. I know what's important to me. I know that the world is a lot bigger than you think and life is a lot longer than you realized. Every day is an opportunity to start fresh, and rock bottom comes with the security of a stable foundation. Not quite as extreme, but I'm doing it in June. Been bored at work for a while, no direction. Fear of what I'd do if I quit. Fear of what my boss would do if he knew I was looking for other work. Planning to travel is a catch-all. Exciting. Gives me a reason to leave work, a reason to save, a reason to finally start minimizing my possessions. I'd rather suffer a few more months so I can't hit the ground running. I sold my company, my house, everything I owned and moved to Australia. Spent 2 months chilling out, then got a job, moved house twice, changed city, now settled in Brisbane. The sea change, the freedom from what had become a stale working and social environment, was wonderful. Definitely recommend that. A change is as good as a rest. I traveled the world for 6 months after undergrad. so didn't go last minute, but it was inspired by the fact that I was finishing my degree mid-year and I had a dream where I then threw my grad school applications in the mail and traveled the world for 6 months. Woke up incredibly jealous of my dream self and then realized there was no reason not to do it. Basically, I'd saved enough money throughout undergrad to buy a car, which was more than enough if I stuck to cheaper countries. Still don't have a car, BTW, but don't regret that decision for a moment. Frankly, it was an incredible experience I will always treasure, and the hardest part was dealing with my parents nervous for their daughter traveling through Laos and South Africa and such places on her own. Of course, in solo travel you are very rarely alone, you meet tons of people. Did sprain my ankle in Laos in a zip lining accident, so wasn't walking well for about a week. But small price to pay in 6 months of adventures. I now live abroad, and my boyfriend and I are now saving money in hopes of doing a big trip together next year. There's so much world to see we likely won't hit up many of the destinations I've been to. Not the world but Canada. Quit my programming job due to having an butthole boss. My GF, now wife, was between jobs, so we just took off for a few weeks to Canada. Got new jobs after we got back. People who have visited Germany, what surprised, amazed or intrigued you the most? I drive through the country thinking that it looked like a fairy tale. Then I realized many fairy tales I knew as a kid likely originated from Germany. The Gebrüder Grimm send their regards. Oktoberfest is a bigger deal in Milwaukee than it is in Köln. Pretty much all German stereotypes are really just Bavarian stereotypes. It's really just as foreign and gimmicky to a northern German as it is to an American. The biggest two were I saw Germans speaking to Germans in English in Berlin, and I saw Brits working service jobs who didn't know a lick of German. After that, I was shocked that Berlin's transit system runs on the honor system. You're expected to purchase a ticket, but there is only a small chance you'll ever be asked to show it. Germans still talk about East-West divisions in the country. Ugh. I lived in Berlin for a year, snuck onto the S-Bahn twice, and got caught both times. The second time, I saw a woman who looked familiar, thought, where do I know her from, and that second, she yelled, Fahrschein bitte. I was surprised by how many Germans spoke perfect English. One of them even apologized to me for ending a sentence in a preposition. The clubbing scene in Berlin. In England a late night is 3/4 in the morning. In Berlin the clubs stayed open till 6 the next night. Some clubs in Berlin open doors Thursday 10 PM and close Monday 11 AM. You go party, get home for sleep and go back to the place for more party. We rented a car in Frankfurt, then drove to Wurzburg, Stuttgart, Munich, south into the Bavarian Alps, and finally north to Dresden. After all that driving, I realized just how freaking great the Autobahn really is. I was nervous at first because I was expecting this lawless experience where there's never a speed limit and you can drive like a madman legally. In reality, it was efficient as heck and very pleasant to drive on, as long as you knew and obeyed etiquette, which almost everyone did. It was like all the drivers were cogs in a well-oiled machine. Frickin' glorious. Also, all the windmills. Just don't see those much in the US, at least not me. They are beautiful. American here. The complete lack of ice in beverages. All of the drinks had their own glass, and the glasses had a line which to fill the liquid too. It was so weird drinking water rodeo cold. That and drinking in public. It was the best wandering around the open air markets holding a glühwein. My boyfriend is German and I went to visit his mother over the summer in a tiny town about 50 miles east of Frankfurt. The closest large town is Fulda, so I cannot attest to cities, but this is rural living Germany. Everyone spoke English decently well. It was only the elderly that had issues. They all acted like they were bad, but when I tried to practice my German they did a polite "you can speak English dear" kind of attitude. They were curious about what I thought about Germany and America. I got asked about Trump regularly. There were a connection of wonderful bike trails interlacing the small towns around. My BF mentioned biking 20 kilometers to see an ex or go to class regularly, and I thought he was nuts, but after seeing those bike trails I could probably go for 50 and not really notice. Brunchen is God's gift to man. The food is cheap. €20 will get you far in the grocery store. And by the brie, America has laws about having cheeses age less than 60 days, so our brie isn't quite right. I thought it was good, but I was wrong. Also, they don't drink their beer room temperature, so I don't understand that. It's just not super chilled. It's like 40-50 degrees, not 35. Beer is also everywhere. I have a photo of it in an electronics store, and it isn't the large national brands. People drink the local beer. It's just what you do. Also, there isn't much variety. Dunkel, dark, or Weiss, white or wheat, or standard. No IPAs or craft beers, and most people thought it was weird. I loved Guinness. Drinking culture was a lot more relaxed, since people were drinking since legally 16 but culturally 14 or so. No one really cared. I was drinking with a 13-year-old at one point, which was a bit disconcerting to me, but everyone else shrugged and seemed unfazed. The bastardized American food is hilarious. You can buy hot dogs and cheeseburgers already in buns, and it was semi-normal to have the extra large size have an American flag on it. Going clothes shopping is awesome. I needed jeans but didn't understand the sizing. The attendant looked at me, told me a size, gave me a pair, and they were perfect. Quickest I was ever shopping in my life. A benbrit is an interesting tradition. Instead of a full dinner, they have meats, cheeses, and bread to snack on. It was quite good. I miss that, honestly. You weren't so stuffed, just happy before bed. America needs more trains. It was nice to catch the train when it was rainy to the next town. I rarely rode in a car, but for your information, they are all manual. Only dumb people get automatic apparently. The autobahn is sweet. It's not unlimited all the way. When you get near cities there is a speed limit, but through the countryside you may be going fast, but you're never the fastest one on the road. I had a great time in Germany. I miss it. I was surprised how much the landscape looks like my home state of Wisconsin. If the signs in the countryside had been in English, you could have convinced me easily we were in Wisconsin. It's no wonder so many German immigrants settled in Wisconsin. It looked like home. I was amazed at how happy everyone seemed to have visitors to the country. I've never felt more welcome in a foreign place than in Germany. People would apologize to me for their poor English, which just floored me because 1. It's me that should apologize for not speaking the language, as I am the visitor, and 2. Most people's English was better than many Americans' English. I was intrigued at the amount of food and beer, how good it all was, and at beer in the morning. We went to a church service and they had little cakes or donuts after the service like we do at home. But along with coffee there was free beer at 10 in the morning. As a college student I knew I was in heaven. Haha, I'm English and I live and work in Germany. The amount of times people apologize for speaking German when they realize I'm English blows my mind. Dude, you do not have to apologize for speaking German in a German coffee shop in Germany. The amount of Turkish people living in Berlin. I had no idea. Jesus, just the bread. I'm fully convinced Germany only sells bread that can double as shelter in times of need. The food. Dang good. Real portions. My German friend laughed and laughed when I told him this story. In 1976, before Google Maps, of course, I was driving on the Autobahn and I saw a sign saying Ausfurt. I checked my map and could not find this town. No problem. I proceeded another few miles and another sign said Ausfurt. I was thinking that this must be a big place but still could not find it on the map. It eventually dawned on me that it meant exit for all us non-German speaking folks. How beautiful Berlin was. I really wasn't expecting it to be so green and grand for some reason. There were parks everywhere. Also, I was surprised with their openness to talk about the events of World War II. Having spent a long time in Japan where they don't talk about it, it was refreshing to hear German people acknowledge the past and were keen to pass on information. Maybe it's because I had come from Amsterdam, which is gorgeous through and through, but I found Berlin to be incredibly drab and depressing. Parts of the city are truly beautiful though. American that lived in Germany for 2 years. Mefrostock. Raw pork scared the heck out of me initially. Now I really miss it. Lekker metbroodje. My boyfriend and I, Australians, visited in January this year. We were amazed at how well the Germans can drive in snow. In fact, we had just finished commenting on it to each other when we witnessed a 80-year-old German man accidentally back his car into a lamppost. He looked at us, furrowed his brow and made the obvious decision to drive our way and pretend it never happened. We told our German friends when we saw them next, and apparently it's some kind of national shame to not be able to drive one's car perfectly in snow conditions, and he had probably assumed we were judgmental Germans, not bemused Australians. Depends on the part of Germany you're in. In southern Germany you'd be expected to drive properly in snow. In other regions less so. Near Cologne traffic goes to walking speed once the first snowflake was sighted. Having grown up in the south, that peed me off every winter while I was living there. Crap just works. We lived in Italy for 3 years, 2010 to 2013, and took a couple of vacations outside of Munich, Garmisch. Italy was dirty, disorganized chaos 90+% of the time. No such things as lines. Horrible corruption, even in everyday life. Rudeness everywhere we went. When we drove into Germany, it was almost like crossing into a polite, clean wonderland. Everybody obeyed the rules and was quite polite and understanding. We had learned some basic Italian, and were treated with nothing but derision by most Italians. When in Germany, I tried out some of my high school German, 22+ years later, to get directions, and the people I was talking to told me in English that they appreciated my efforts, then answered my questions in English. Gracious, clean, organized. A+++ would visit again. The castles everywhere, good food including the amazing fresh French fries that come with currywurst, the history of Berlin and how much spying the East German regime performed, that there were amazing museums in East Berlin during the communist era, that people didn't seem to mind subsidizing Greece, that people are nostalgic about Ampelmünchen, East German pedestrian crossing symbols, how heavy the traffic is on the autos 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 on the hard-working, industrious people who also play hard. How authentic Germans are. In America, food and services are always done so with a smile. Places like McDonald's force their employees to smile and say have a great day when serving customers, even though it's superficial. In Germany, people understand that the outcome of their day is rarely affected by how friendly the workers are. The employees are more real in their interactions and aren't supposed to act chipper if they don't want to. That's one of the reasons Walmart failed in Germany. They expected to import practices without change to Germany, which included smiling people at the door greeting customers, and bagging of groceries. Let's just say we weren't particularly thrilled. All the castles, being able to drink out in public any way you want, the amazing food, I could go on for days. You're so much like my own culture, Norway, Iceland. You're a whole lot more organized than Iceland, but you might as well just be Norway, with more people and fewer fjords. You must have been to the north of Germany. The south is very different, Imo. From my experience, Norway is like Germany except everything is the correct size for tall people like me. Also much more beautiful nature. Hello, OP. I had the good fortune of visiting a small town in Germany called Wuppertal. It is near Cologne. If I recall correctly, it was lovely. Everyone was incredibly nice and helpful, and almost everyone spoke English. Background: I went there for a first aid competition. I was impressed, almost to the point where my jaw dropped, at how efficient Germans are in their first aid. It was phenomenal. Almost machine-like efficiency. And the food, wunderbar. It is funny that you call Wuppertal lovely. I'm living close to Wuppertal and it is often an example of ugliness. There are some nice parts and the Schwebebahn is awesome, but it does not have a nice historic city center as a lot of other German cities. Dunner. It's amazing. Why is there not a food cart selling it in my city? I like the train system a lot. Very nice. I felt like I got stared at a lot on buses and trains. To be fair, I was speaking English, but this wasn't like a quick surprised side glance. This was full on, not looking away when I caught them. Lasted until I got off the bus staring. I've read in other contexts that apparently Americans stare less. That is, the time span after which it is considered staring and rude is shorter in the US. Your alcohol and party culture among youths. I was a 17-year-old American in Germany for 4 days. We were invited to 4 different parties. However, only one of those we got drunk at, prom, and the rest was just chillin', having a few drinks, and making some BBQ. Since you're exposed to alcohol at such a young age, I really feel like the attitude towards it is so different from an American perspective, as at the time I thought you only really drank to get drunk and adults were the weird ones drinking only a few drinks. It is very different, and makes it less of a rebellious thing to do. How clean it is. I've been to a few places in Germany and it's very clean. The bathrooms even have automatic toilet seat cleaners. I could easily live there just for that reason. You don't have to live in a bathroom, regardless of how clean it is. Public transit is clean, inexpensive, and functional even in smaller cities. It is very easy to get from place to place. DB and U-Bahns were awesome when I stayed in Cologne for a trade show in Dusseldorf. I was told Germans are humorless. Not only is this untrue, Germans are the loudest and most honest laughers I have ever seen. Lots of throwing the head back to laugh. I was surprised to find that almost every restaurant we visited had tortellini on the menu. This was hilarious because despite the fact I translated the menu to my family, they always got tortellini because they could order it for themselves. I ate a lot more variety of foods on that trip. Everyone was super friendly. The food was great. Service was wonderful. Another thing I noticed is people drive the way they are supposed to. If you approach a car in the number 1 lane on the autobahn, they move over to the 2nd lane. I met some wonderful people when I stayed in Munich. If I had the opportunity, I would live there. I lived in Germany as a kid from the mid-80s to the early 90s and have been fortunate that I've been able to visit again a few times as an adult. While I'm not German, I still kind of feel a sense of Germany being home, or other home. Visiting as an adult gave me an appreciation of some of the things I didn't really get as a kid. I feel that German workers are much more respected than they are here. You don't hear people saying things like he's just a waiter, or but what do you really want to do? My girlfriend worked in a relatively upscale restaurant here while she was in school and made relatively good money doing it. Definitely more than I make now. But since it isn't what Americans see as a real job, there were zero benefits, and her income was based solely on the generosity of others, virtually everything being closed on Sundays, and most shops close for about half an hour in the midday and shut down early in the evening. I think that's awesome. Obviously that's less prevalent in the major cities but common in the smaller towns and villages. People know to work around those schedules and don't need to have everything available at any time of day. I think that ties directly back into the respect of employees. As Americans, we have no concept of old, I mean really effing old, history in Germany, and the rest of Europe is everywhere and embraced. Go into the downtown of any major city, particularly the shopping districts, and you'll find centuries old buildings that have been retrofitted and modernized inside while maintaining the historic exterior. The town that I lived in celebrated its 800-year anniversary while I lived there. The street we lived on translated as Mill Corner Street, and at the bend in the road behind our apartment was the old mill dating from the 1600s. It wasn't a functioning mill anymore. The water wheel hadn't turned in ages, but it was still a working farm. We would buy our milk and eggs there because they were so much better than the commissary. I like ordering beer in Germany. It's very regional. Nothing like these restaurants and tap houses in the States with 100 beers on tap. There you walk in and ask for the style of beer you want and you get what is brewed locally. That's a bit of a generalization but not grossly exaggerated. I could go on, but this has been a lot of writing on my phone, or handy as the Germans call them, and I'm starting to go cross-eyed. Oh, one more thing. Germany is super dog friendly. Almost all the stores close on Sunday. There are no open container laws, and I imagine public intoxication laws are super lax. Peanut butter isn't a thing. You tip people outside public restrooms for keeping them clean. You have to pay with cash most places. Many years ago I went on a school trip to Berlin. What I absolutely loved about the city was the most subtle difference between East and West when it comes to their crosswalk symbols. I love those little guys and how one is with hat and the other without. The amazing part was that where I went with my family when I was like 6 was that there were castles freaking everywhere. It was awesome. There was also a lantern festival parade led by a dude in full medieval armor on horseback. I went with a school trip when I was 15. I noticed that the boys who were 14-15 looked like they were 12, whereas the ones who were 16 looked more like they were 18. In the span of 1 year they aged 6. Flew to Berlin, took a train to Leipzig, spent a few days there for a music festival, took the train to Dessau, spent the night there, took the train back to Berlin, spent the night there, flew home. It is freaking gorgeous. The weather is beautiful, the architecture, breathtaking. The people are incredibly helpful, even if they didn't speak English. When they saw that we were trying to speak German, they went out of their way to help. I want to die of old age in Leipzig. My husband and I only ran into one rude person our whole trip, and it was the bus driver in Berlin when we first arrived. He must have been having a bad morning. Hahaha. Bus drivers in Berlin have a reputation for being extremely grumpy. Lived there 10 years and got yelled at many times. I am glad you like the rest of the country, though. Great salad. Like everywhere we ate that had a side salad was a legit salad, not the joke ones you get here in the UK. And schnitzel, goddamn. Everything is so clean in Germany. There were flowers growing everywhere and zero trash. Everyone looked so nice and well kept. In fact, everything was so nice I was always super anxious about going out because it felt like I'd stick out like a sore thumb. Obviously not German. I'm going to be living here until the end of the summer and I've been here for 4 months already, so there's been a number of surprises for sure. Almost everything is closed on Sunday. Almost everything is closed by 8 or 9 o'clock. Restaurants, bars will still be open but only serving beer. Germany, Bavaria especially, is a place where things get done early. As a New Yorker, this was a bit of a culture shock. The food is absolutely fantastic. I'm honestly surprised that German food isn't more common in the United States. The portions are huge and almost everything is meat. The German people have more awareness. They know more about history than the average American. And they know more about what's going on in the rest of the world than the average American, at least from my experience. The German people are very friendly. I was told that they are stoic and aloof, but almost everyone I've encountered has been really open, helpful, and interested in talking. Maybe I'm getting special treatment for being an outsider, but it's still a very welcome surprise. Although Germany is known for its cars, cycling is very common here. Most cities and towns have adequate bike lanes. I purchased my own bike and it's a nice way of getting around. If you like palaces, castles, and cathedrals, come to Germany. There's one around every corner, and they're all beautiful. Despite what our world news will tell you, the refugee crisis isn't that bad. It's still a problem that requires an effective solution, but it does not impact daily life at all really. In my region I see more Asian tourists than Arab migrants. The beer. Holy crap. The beer. It's so good. I'll never be able to go back to drinking that crappy beer at college parties. People here drink beer like the British drink tea. If you feel like having a beer in the middle of the day, nobody will judge you for it. Germany is surprisingly diverse, even between Germans. The attitudes, lifestyles, and even dialects of a German city can be vastly different than that of another city just 1 hour away. So yeah, loving it here in Germany. Definitely would recommend coming here. It's a hugely underrated destination. I went to Berlin with school around this time last year. What really amazed me is just how efficiently your services run. The trains and buses were rarely late or took too long. The only exception was trying to get back from a Hertha match. But that's understandable. Secondly, even though there's either really low hanging clouds or it's a smog, I thought just breathing in and around the city was so refreshing. It was so enjoyable and really just woke you up. Finally, what I really loved was the fact that everyone apart from a few exceptions was super lovely and was so happy to see us try to speak German, and everyone was very patient with us. And your street takeaway kebabs are super amazing and delicious. They're so different to what we have in Ireland. And your women are beautiful. Tropical Island Water Park 11/10. Really loved it. So much so that some friends and I are planning to go back the summer of 2017 and maybe see some more of the country. Great country 10/10. I've been living here for 2 years and there's still a few things I can't over. 1. That they don't cut out swear words in songs on the radio. Every time I hear someone say frick I think someone is going to be in trouble. 2. Public amenities, like big outdoor swimming pools for the public or well-maintained football pitches with goalposts and nets. Where I'm from you can't have nice things because dickheads will smash it up because they are dickheads. 3. The beer. Delicious. Except Oettinger. 4. Everything being closed on Sunday. If you fancy some microwave popcorn for an afternoon movie then tough, you should have planned your impulses in advance. 5. Work. How serious they take work and how much pride they get from it. I mean of trays to have it's a good one, it's just weird. 6. The Hotch Wars walled. Beautiful part of the world. 7. It irks me how everything has to be done the logical way, even down to stuff like sweeping the floor or doing the dishes. My GF is a micromanager. It's going to get done either way. Who cares if I'm not sweeping logically? 8. Public holidays not being on the next nearest Monday. If the date of the holiday falls on a Wednesday this year, then it's Wednesday off. If it's Tuesday, and if it's Sunday, tough crap. No extra day off for you. 9. Swabish Bardish cooking is amazing. No matter if it's beer or a politician, never trust Oettinger. How much I enjoyed Berlin. My god, the history. It's like wading through waist-deep drifts of snow when you've only ever gotten a light dusting. Also how well they handled their problematic past, acknowledging without either whitewashing or wallowing. America could learn a thing or two from them. German food was unsurprisingly delicious. German people very kind and courteous. Almost everyone spoke English. The very first person we met was our cab driver, who spoke 4 languages. My only experience is the West, but the country was beautiful and very clean. Constance was wonderful. I've done a fair amount of travel. If I didn't live in the US I would love to live there. I was overwhelmed upon visiting Leipzig and entering St. Thomas Church where J.S. Bach had been organist, composer and music director. It was like stepping back in time and feeling his profound presence there within those walls. Yeah, walking around any German city it's like oh cool, a cathedral 300 years older than America. Literally cannot believe that nobody has pointed out the grotesque porcelain madness that is a German toilet. Honestly the most alarming part of Germany for me. German engineering, we don't want to get poopy toilet water splashed all over our butt if we drop off a big dookie. My first time in Berlin, I was amazed by the whole feel of the place. It still had some of that post-war artsy hipster-esque feel to it. I remember going to a bar that looked like a beach bar, sand and torches included, in the middle of town. I celebrated New Year's Eve there a few years ago, and both the Christmas markets and the million people in Unter der Linden was amazing. The most surprising thing was the total lack of alternatives to the Hofbräuhaus in downtown Munich. There was a lot of dodgy places in the area surrounding the train station, but the area around Marienplatz was almost completely dead. That's BC. Marienplatz is like the Times Square of Munich. There are some cool areas a short distance away, but most of the Altstadt is for shopping or tourist traps, except the Viktualienmarkt. How saying how are you is not a greeting but a serious question. Said this to a girl at work while walking by her in the hall. She really took the time to tell me her story. They don't take it like saying what's up in the States. Also, heard a few people say and Americans in general, act fake nice because we strike up conversations and overly say thank you and stuff. I was being genuine, but apparently it seems fake in Europe in general. And efficiency at work. At work they only focus on work and getting out of there. It felt like I was bothering them when I'd start a friendly banter at work. Serious, Redditors who have visited Japan, what was your favorite or worst experience that you want to share? Best experience, 9 PM at night, drunk as crap in downtown Osaka. Me friends, let's get sushi for dinner, we haven't even had any while being here. Random Japanese man interjects and says, sushi daytime, nighttime, ramen. Ended up pushing us into a small ramen shop on the corner of the street where I had the best pork ramen I'll ever have in my life. Drunk Osaka nights are amazing. We met this random Korean guy on his own who barely spoke any English, so it was a lot of charades. Because he was on own, he tagged along with us to a bar down the road and we drank many beers and ate lots of chicken. At the end of the night the Korean guy paid our tab without saying a word and disappeared. Korean Dan, you rocked. I stayed in a tiny rural town a few years back and it was very evident many of the people there had never met or seen a foreigner in person. Every day I would walk through the snow to a bakery to get my daily fix and have a lengthy conversation with a nice older lady who spoke no English, myself speaking no Japanese. On the way back I would always walk past a dozen or so children leaving kindergarten who would have all been under the age of 5. I would always smile, but they would all stop nervously, frozen as they watched the white, bearded, 6'2" giant pass. After a few days they would spot me from afar and pressure the leader of their pack to greet me, and I replied in kind. For the next week they would all individually say konnichiwa and bow, and I would greet each of these tiny children one at a time while standing next to snowbanks taller than themselves. They were always very excited and it was hilariously adorable. One day I slipped hard coming down an icy hill and they all came running. I was sitting on my butt after sliding a few feet quite comically and I remember the littlest girl asking Kyojin, Dejabidasuka, giant, are you okay? I miss that little town a lot. That's cute as frick. I was waiting outside Osaka Castle one night for it to get dark so I could take some pictures. While waiting I got talking to a retired older gentleman from Osaka named Kenji. We were later joined on the bench by a middle-aged man from Tokyo in town on business. The two of them got into an argument about who had the more incomprehensible Japanese accent. Both claimed they could barely understand the other person. They then started pressuring me to state whose Japanese accent sounded better, but to me, a Canadian whose understanding of Japanese extended to the basic hellos, goodbyes and thank yous, there was no noticeable difference at all. They were both quite offended I couldn't differentiate between the two and insisted the other was speaking gibberish, in the most polite and respectful way possible though, because Japan. It was that day I learned there was a rivalry between Osaka and Tokyo. Haha, Osakans are known for their accent. The Ghibli Museum was magical. I'm not even heavily into the movies, but there was something just wonderful about being in that place and seeing the exhibits. Most disappointing was the whale shark in the Osaka aquarium. I love the ocean and was so pumped to see it, but it was so depressing to see it alone in an almost empty tank. There was just sand at the bottom. The gift shop at the Osaka aquarium was amazing though. Overall I found even Japan's best aquariums, Osaka Kyokan and Okinawa Chiromi, to be mediocre and depressing due to the lack of any kind of enrichment in their habitats and often very small tanks enclosures. Zoos too, for that matter. I went last November with a friend. The best thing about Japan was the people. They are so friendly, helpful and polite. People actually went out of their way to help, which is something I'm just not used to. In fact it was a bit off-putting at first, because I thought everyone was out to scam me or something, but they really just wanted to help. I spent 5 days in Tokyo, then another 12 days traveling around the country. People outside of Tokyo were much friendlier than people in it, but less likely to speak English. I guess that's to be expected anyway. They did try their hardest though. A young student came over to us when we were eating lunch in Kyoto and asked if he could sit beside us and practice speaking English. We were happy to oblige, and in return he showed us around the area and gave us tips on what to see and what to avoid. My most memorable experience was sitting in a bar with my friend in Nagano. Some girl kept pointing to us, and then a guy came over and said that girl wanted to talk to me. He acted as an interpreter as this Japanese girl was asking me all sorts of questions about Ireland and Europe. She was amazed at how tall I was, and I'm not even that tall. We then had a dance competition and a dance-off, all without being able to even directly talk to each other. Everyone in the bar was getting in on it too, posing for photos with us, and I kinda felt like a minor celebrity. Haha. Fantastic country and I will 100% be back. One odd thing that I noticed was that so many people smoke, and there are smoking areas everywhere. You can even smoke in chain restaurants like Dennis. Coming from Europe where smoking is pretty much banned in all indoor areas, that was a bit strange, but not at all a big deal. I couldn't agree with you more. I found the people there exceptionally warm, gentle, and genuinely concerned about the well-being of those around them. People had genuine respect for each other, the country, nature, their roles in society, elderly, children, etc. Even the most menial jobs were done meticulously, and with pride. I learned some very basic Japanese before going. Traveled there alone for 10 days. Near the end of the trip, when I felt like I hadn't had a real conversation in weeks, I stayed at a ryokan in the mountains. I went to one of the ryokan's onsen, hot spring baths, that night, and a little old Japanese lady asked me, in Japanese, if I could speak Japanese. We had a very broken conversation, both sitting there nude at the hot spring, and it was the highlight of my trip. There is totally such a thing as a language bonus when traveling in a non-English speaking country. I know a bit of German and a tiny bit of Japanese. Both of these have given me customer service and insights that I wouldn't have had otherwise. I live in Japan. The best thing that I've done here is volunteered at an elementary school. It was as much fun for me as it was for the kids. I pretty much just played games and let them ask me questions about America. I speak Japanese, and they all told me their favorite things about Japan. My worst experience was in a public bath. I washed myself and entered the bath and some old guy started making pretty rude comments towards me about how foreign people should stay out of their spaces. After I told him I understood what he was saying, he wanted to talk to me about World War II. The whole thing was pretty uncomfortable. Yeah, I think there are just a bunch of that older generation that still have those terrible Axis views and we simply have to wait for them to die out. Japan did some seriously messed up crap in World War II. They were just as bad as the Nazis, if not worse. Just came back from Japan. I'm impressed at how clean the streets are. There is no trash anywhere. Yes, the trash cans are hard to find, yet you don't see any trash lying around. I know. WTF is up with the lack of trash cans. It seems like Tokyo intentionally makes the city so clean and then hides all their trash cans to FK with you. I studied abroad here twice and live here now. Definitely not the best experience, but certainly one of the most memorable. Me and maybe 5 other Americans went to all-you-can-drink karaoke one night intending to do an all for a friend's 20th birthday. After about an hour in, some drunk salaryman accidentally barges into our room with his friend in tow. He goes, "Hey, Gaijin," then turns to his friends and shouts happily Gaijin while the friend is trying to extract him and apologize to us. We're a little taken aback, but at least no one is angry. The drunk one then says, "Gaijin, you must sing," with US and gestures wildly to the room across from ours. We all look at each other and just kinda shrug and think, "Frick it, let's go." We stand up to go and the guy yells, "Yee," then bolts back into his own room. The 6 of us follow his friend into the room and see it's the biggest room in the place. There are maybe 12 to 15 salarymen and OLs all wearing their nice suits wondering who the frick we are. When the original drunk yells, we going sing with the Gaijin and put on We Are the World. All of us are in our early 20s and aren't even that familiar with the song. But we sing anyway. The entire time we're still getting looks of "Why are these Gaijin kids in here?" from everyone. At the end, my friends quickly shuffle out back into our room, but the original drunk yell asks, "You know Japanese song?" At this point I just think, "Frick it, let's do this." So I nod and he hands me the karaoke selector. I put in by the blue hearts and immediately everyone in the room loses their crap. They're just excited to sing this song, let alone the fact that I can sing it, which blows their minds even further. It's not even that hard a song. At the end of the song everyone is clapping and screaming, and I'm just wondering what the frick dimension I've stepped into. The original drunk grabs 2 cups of booze off the table, neither of which were mine or his, and says, "Gaijin, kanpei, to Japan," and we cheers. I then go back to my own room and rejoin my friends. I've got other good stories, but this one will always stick out since both parties were confused by what was happening, and just that one drunk guy thought it was all normal. Okay, the image of you all singing We Are the World at the behest of a drunk, excited Japanese guy will light the rest of my dreary, boring but workday. Been to Japan around 10 times. There are many awesome things about Japan. They really respect their jobs and puts in 100%. From CEO to the janitor. Nobody half-asses. The food. OMG the food. The aesthetics. Worst experience was when I was stopped by police at night and asked for my passport. I didn't have it, so they took me back to my hostel. then took me to the station and had me sign a form saying I was wrong to not bring my passport and it's my responsibility or some crap like that. I'm Chinese and the whole thing felt super racist. You have to carry your passport at all times in Japan as a foreigner. Of course, I didn't learn this until I'd already been walking around without it for a week. Never got questioned by police though. I visited Japan a few years ago in order to meet my SOS family. Favorite experience? The onsen. Everyone else has already mentioned them. They are truly wonderful. They also made my skin smoother. I also enjoyed the winter food. Oden, Nabiyaki, Mikan. Worst experience. My political family didn't accept me fully. According to them, I'm only dating my partner because I'm after his citizen status. I'm going to marry him, gain citizenship, and divorce him to escape my developing country. I was also told that my opinion is invalid because I'm a foreigner. So I bought a laptop on my second visit. I was asking really stupid technical questions because Windows 7 was about to launch. Some laptops came with an upgrade, and because I had specific technical requirements for school. When we hit a language barrier, he went to get and opened an electronic dictionary and started translating things for me. It was absolutely amazing and would never happen in North America. I have a similar experience. Son electronic dictionary when buying a printer last year. Customer service is a real thing that people take pride in, and employees and random people will go to great extents to help you. All the crap people talk about Japan being racist and xenophobic, most of which is true. These and countless other experiences where people have gone out of their way to help are really memorable. Yay. Everyone takes so much pride in their work there. They try really hard to be good at their job. Every job. The people who work on the trains, construction workers, street cleaners, store clerks, etc. Admirable. I had always wanted to go to Japan since I was a little girl. I went in October 2015 and it was the perfect trip. Highlights: taxi cab drivers wear gloves. The cabs are spotless. The seat backs have white lace. In Tokyo I got to see the fish market before it closed. It's reopening in another location. What an experience. Kyoto was amazing. I got dressed as a geisha and realized why in full-on geisha kimono it is difficult to smile. Drink more than a thimbleful of water, many layers smashing you flat. I actually felt the back of my stomach touching my vertebrae. The fabrics were rich and beautiful. The socks with the toe space. Your big toe gets its own area for the Japanese slippers. And the crazy wooden slippers with the heel in the center. The bamboo forest with the creaking haunting sounds of the bamboo moving in the wind. The bathrooms with toilets with built-in bidets. In the train stations even. Not just hotels. And the bidets that play music or sound so no one hears what you're doing in a public bathroom. The bullet trains. The trains that have women-only cars so no strange men can push against them in rush hour. Because it was autumn. The roasted chestnuts that tasted of autumn itself. The breakfasts with miso soup and fish and tea so clean tasting and different than the typical US or European breakfasts. Everyone was extraordinarily polite. I will go back again hopefully next spring for the cherry blossoms. Sakura. Loved Japan. It's not closed yet. Source. Live in Japan. It's an awesome market. I spent a week in Tokyo in 2004. Managed to get around on my own without speaking a word of Japanese as the signage and subway was really easy to understand. The quirky restaurants, friendly people, and sightseeing was awesome. However, it was so expensive. Just crazy. In my 2 trips to Japan I mostly stuck to grocery store and 7-Eleven food. My phone did a passable job translating labels and there was no need to annoy anyone with my lack of any Japanese. Also, I found one grocery store with a self-checkout with an English button. That was nice. I went last summer, spent 10 days in Tokyo. Being a big nerd, Akihabara and Nad Gundam Front were major highlights, but Asakusa and Yoyogi Park were the coolest parts for me. The bugs out in Yoyogi were huge, with beetles the size of my hand, fat flies, and trees that sounded like they were powering up because of cicadas. If you can get to Yoyogi on a Sunday, then the greasers come out to dance. Shibuya is cool to see the scramble and the statue of Hachiko, but otherwise it was kinda grimy, which was weird, as everywhere else I went in Tokyo was amazingly clean. Everyone I interacted with was super helpful, even with the language barrier, not as much of a problem as I thought it would be. Lots of stuff has English options or infographics. However, as someone much taller than the average Japanese person, I would occasionally get some stink eye and strange looks from older people on the trains. It was super fun, even in the middle of the summer, Texas-like heat with humidity, and I can't wait to figure out how to go again in the future. Last September I went to Tokyo alone for a business trip. Going to Japan had been one of my dreams since I was a child, but in this particular case, I was told a week in advance that I'd be going, and that I had to find and book a hotel, arrange meetings. I was attending Tokyo Game Show, and I'd have a couple of days off after that. I had plenty of good experiences and a few not so bad ones, but one that really stood out is the following. My Japanese is really bad, and I could rarely have a conversation in English, let alone Spanish, my native language. For a couple of days, I had only spoken the words sumimasen, arigato and hi, and I was frankly beginning to get depressed. I tried my luck to have a conversation by going to an American fast food chain. The waitress asked me where I was from, and she was excited to learn I was a Spanish speaker. She told me she was studying Spanish and with confidence yelled, "Yo tengo mucha hambre!" Exclamation point, yo quiero comer paella. I'm very hungry. I want to eat paella. It was just a ridiculous textbook sentence, but it made me so happy to hear familiar words in a place and in a moment where I was feeling so alone. That aside, being from South America, the cultural shock was huge. I couldn't believe people left their phones, notebooks unattended in public places, or how every clerk welcomed you with a big smile, and then, as you left, they would bow on your way out. Whenever I needed help, people would go out of their way to help me, even if they couldn't understand me. I grew up believing that respect is something you've got to earn, but in Japan everyone tried their best not to bother others. Most of the time I wondered if I was actually bothering them, but they were too polite to tell me. The best thing was trying all the different food in Osaka. Lots of things grilled on sticks and beer. Who could ask for more? On the other hand, Hiroshima was pretty bad. Not the town, but seeing the pictures etc and knowing that my country is the only country that had ever done this and we did it twice. I was in Japan last spring visiting with my mother. We were walking through a pretty large shrine area and there were women in these booths calling people over to taste their tea. My mother and I walked over to the booth to look at the samples, but the lady grabbed the tray and waved over some high school students. She was trying pretty hard to ignore us and I politely asked if we could try a sample in Japanese. She gave a big sigh and took the tiny paper sample cup and split the sample in half, so she wouldn't have to give us a full, already tiny, sample. That was probably my only truly negative experience. Japan is one of my favorite places on this earth, so unique, so amazing. Culture is astounding. So to preface this, restaurants in Japan are mostly separated by meat served, not food genre. That is, pork restaurant, chicken restaurant, tofu restaurant, etc. This is both the best and worst thing. For people who don't know, you could end up stuck in a restaurant that serves nothing you can eat, and for groups with people of mixed dietary restrictions you also could run into some trouble. But all in all, I thought it was really cool. Specifically, one of my favorite things about Japan was a small tofu restaurant in Kyoto. It's deep in an alley and they claim to be one of the first places to start serving tofu. The tofu I had there was served to us in a way I have never seen before. It was so soft and tender, served in a massive boiling chamber with water and spices. Was one of the coolest dining experiences I have ever had. Also got to sit on the floor on a mat in traditional Japanese style and nothing was in English. My best experiences have to be two different ones. My first was when I climbed my Fuji in 2012 to watch the sunset. Completely changed my perspective on life in such a surreal way. Being so high above than clouds looking at the sun peek out was the best thing I've ever experienced. Second would be when I went to Enoshima with my girlfriend at the time and watching the sunset behind the mountains at the other end of the bay while we sat there taking as much time as I was going away the next day. I went with a student group in 1999. It was a total blast. but probably my favorite part was the last night there. The whole group was drinking and singing along with music at Iggy Rock's cafe. Then the owner shows up out of nowhere holding a dog with a mohawk. He pointed excitedly at the dog and said Iggy. Went with a group 3 summers ago. Some of the highlights. The pizza in Japan is surprisingly good. We ended up getting pizza a few times in various locations and it was all better than a lot of the pizza I've had in the US. Our okonomiyaki chef in Hiroshima was great. We were chatting with him. Some of the others were flirting. We taught him some expressions in English. He sang a little, joked around, and was just overall amazing. 2 guys dressed as samurai were putting on a presentation at Kumamoto Castle and interacted with us. And after it was over we could still hang out with them if we wanted. And one of the 2 was goofing off while the other one just shook his head. Later on I hear a loud bazinga from a distance and sure enough, the one samurai is with my friend who was wearing a Sheldon Cooper shirt. Yes, I know. BBT sucks. The Ghibli Museum is worth checking out too. Tokyo was surprisingly peaceful at night. Aside from some drunk guy we watched from our hotel, we met a little Shiba named Kainitsu Kashima and he was such a chill little dog and let us pet him, and it was especially endearing seeing him on the boat back to the mainland. I still think about him a lot. I hope he's having a good day. Some downsides. Lots and lots of spiders in the forested areas. Don't go to southern Japan in the summer. I nearly fainted. There was a giant roach in our hotel in Beppu. The staff was just like whatever. The museum at Peace Park, Hiroshima, has a powerful message but it is not for the faint of heart. I have a fairly thick skin and I still wanted to puke. If you're a vegetarian like me it can be tricky finding food, and in some cases you might just have to compromise so you have something to eat. I went to Japan to visit my brother in Tokyo for 2 weeks when I was 14. The whole trip was pretty surreal, but one part in particular stands out as the coolest and weirdest. Arcades are insanely popular in Japan, and I spent a good bit of time frequenting them while I was there. I saw one of those prize games with the lights that go around the cabinet and if you stop the light at the right time, it drops the corresponding bucket of prizes. There was a super sick bucket with a Game Boy Advance and a bunch of games and other Nintendo swag. I decided to try my luck, and to my surprise, I won on my first try. Only it wasn't the Game Boy bucket I so desperately wanted. It was a bucket packed to the brim with Hello Kitty stuffed dolls and swag. There were dozens of them, more than I could even fit in my backpack. Hello Kitty dolls were pouring out of the bin and onto the floor. While I was standing there pondering how I was going to collect and transport all this Hello Kitty merchandise and how I was ever going to convince my family I didn't mean to win a lifetime supply of Hello Kitties, a Japanese boy and girl walked up. The girl excitedly said some stuff to me in Japanese that I couldn't even begin to recount. I panicked and extended my hand, bearing a gift of a single Hello Kitty from my bounty. She went freaking apeshit. It was like one of those animes or something. She was literally jumping up and down and screaming. It was then I realized the guy was looking at me, very obviously angry but resigned that he wasn't going to be able to do much to someone twice his size and a foot taller. I sort of awkwardly stuffed the rest of my bounty into my backpack and walked out of the arcade with my arms filled with the rest, dropping kitties every once in a while in my wake. The look my brother gave me when he saw me walk up with my arms full of Hello Kitties was priceless. Dude was prob bummed you didn't give him one. I feel like my experience was totally opposite to Menet. I studied Japanese for years and was fluent, then moved to Nagoya for a 1-year study program. The people were polite to my face, but so rude if they thought I couldn't hear. I'm a small white girl, 166 cm and 52 kg, and was constantly told you're too fat to fit when trying to buy size L clothing. My mum came to visit and I took her to MT Fuji, where the train guard ignored me asking which station I needed. Thankfully, an old lady came up, asked him the exact same question to which he over-enthusiastically replied. She was very kind and knew what he was doing. Also, it turns out I have a soy allergy so I had to eat pretty bland. A lot of the food didn't agree with me out there. I enjoyed it when I took 2 weeks to travel around as a tourist and was treated as such, but I felt so isolated and rebuked as someone living there. People treated me super well to my face when they thought I was a tourist who couldn't speak Japanese, but were directly rude when they realized I lived there. so many times. When are you going home? No, sooner than that, and flat out ignored me when I spoke fluent Japanese. I wonder what I did wrong. Was there something about me that came off bad? Did I try too hard to go out and socialize, putting people off? So many people have such positive experiences and speak so highly of their time in Japan. My time was so miserable. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.